my itinerary, and Pastor Weesner emailed, and he said, kind of figured out where I was traveling, and he said, so any chance you could be free on this Sunday? I had a missionary wasn't able to make it, and so we'd love to have you. And so I'm a stand-in for a missionary. This is great. So I'm so glad it worked out. I have so many memories of our times here, and really look at this church as one of the churches that helped us get launched as missionaries back in 2005. And I still remember Brother Dave fiddling with our presentation way back then, trying to give it the ultimate, umph and punch in this presentation we had. And so just what a blessing. Thank you for being you and for being here. And it's just great to be here again. I wish I remembered everybody's names. And so please don't think I have a good memory. So Pastor helps me out a little bit and gives me some clues and tips and things. But let me mention a couple things. We'll have video and then I'll come up, and I do want to share some things. So on the back table, there is this magazine. I think there's enough for every family to have one. This has some really neat stories. This is put out by our mission board, and it's different stories from different missionaries all over the world. It's really encouraging. One of the articles is by a man, actually I guess by his wife, but he is now with the Lord. Their picture is together, but he was in Germany. His wife is still there, church planning, and really needed a liver transplant. And I don't know all the details, but maybe it just got to him a little bit too late. Not sure, but he is with the Lord. And but anyway, really neat stories here. I don't really have that many prayer cards with me, and I apologize. I was hunting them, and I was trying to find out. I think I was running out. I thought I had just a few left. I do have something back there that has my picture on it. You could take that, and you could remember to pray for me by looking at this. And plus, I love the little caption, "Where will you go?" And I like that. So you could almost emphasize every single word in that four-word sentence. Where will you go? Where will you go? Where will you go? Where will you go? And so I think that's a great emphasis. So those of you that don't know me, my name is Tim Berry. I have a wife, Laura, 6 children. Usually we often travel together, so this is a solo run for me. So my family's in South Carolina. We have been ministering in the Philippines, primarily in a Bible college ministry, since 2005 as a family. And we've checked in with you every now and then over the years, and are grateful for that. Pastor Weesner came over and visited us several years ago and taught a class on respectable sins. And it was great, and I was so thankful for that partnership. So this video is a video that our mission board put together, highlighting training, the value of training nationals, and you'll see me spotlighted in that. It is a privilege to have a part in the work of God. It's nothing we deserve. No one deserves to have any part. No one deserves salvation. And then to think of being able to actually be His servant and have a part in His work, for Him to count you faithful, putting you in the ministry, that is a great privilege. If I could summarize our ministry in 3 words, I would start off with the word training. And that's probably what a lot of people think of. And, you're involved in a Bible college ministry on the mission field. So you're involved in training. I would say, absolutely. And maybe to zero that in a little bit would be mentoring, where we are working with people whom we are seeking to influence and direct. But I think even deeper than that is the idea of modeling, where when you think of training, you think more of the impartation of information. But what we're doing is more than just giving information. We are, through God-given relationships in a disciple-making context, we're trying to model what it means to live the Christian life. When they come to us from these other countries, we are training them to go back to their country, make disciples, start churches, go back to their churches, minister in their churches, really trying to help them go back to their countries and be disciples of Christ in their countries, with the idea of then they make disciples as well and the work of the Great Commission goes on. As missionaries, we are very transient. We've got to view ourselves more as scaffolding, where we're there as scaffolding to help work on a building, but the day comes when you take that scaffolding down and then you put it in a different place. So training of national leadership is essential for that church to move forward. We are faced with ideologies everywhere. It is essential, I think, that we be turning out well-equipped disciples, well-equipped leaders, well-equipped Christians. They need to be able to think and to think biblically about these ideologies and issues and not run from them, but be able to confront them. And I think without being well-equipped, maybe you're effective in reaching the margins of society, but when it comes to reaching society itself or culture itself, making an impact on the kind of the core of that culture, you're not going to reach that unless you are well-equipped biblically to engage that culture. One of our graduates, his church is very missions-minded. A man from his church went to UAE. He's working in UAE. His real purpose there is to plant churches. He's got a church that he's planted. He's pastoring that church. When I was in that church, we had people from all these different nationalities that came to that church, including unsaved people came to the meetings in that church. And that is what God is doing in Asia. He is using the non-Western world to reach these Asian and Middle Eastern countries in a way that Westerners really, we as Westerners do not have those kind of open doors. Training nationals is really a kind of friendship. What you're trying to do is, okay, I'm going to tell you everything I know. I'm going to tell you about my experience in the Christian life. I'm going to open myself up to you with the idea that we are now equals in this. We're friends. We are brothers in Christ. And with the idea that I am only so long in this world, and I am only so long in your country. And the future is about you. It is not about me. And I want to tell you all I know so that you can then, move forward. You can stand on my shoulders, so to speak, just like I stand on somebody else's shoulders. And you can fly higher, you can shoot farther, you can do greater things for Christ than I ever dreamed of doing. There's a verse at the end of Acts. This is not our text for the message today, but there's a verse at the end of Acts 14, which is at the end of the first missionary journey. And it's when they come back from all the travels. They would be Paul and Barnabas. And the very end of chapter 14, so they do all this traveling and ministering and preaching, evangelizing, discipling. And then it says in chapter 14, verse 27, when they were come, so they go back to Antioch where they had been sent by the grace of God. And they come and they gather the church together and they rehearsed all that God had done with them and how He had opened the door of faith unto the Gentiles. And what I want to do for the first several minutes here is just share with you some of the things that we have been able to do. And this was encouraging to me. I sat down a few weeks ago and was working through this, and it's encouraging to me because you have the passing of years, and we've been involved in this ministry since 2005, so it's been about 17 years we've been involved with that, and you've been really a part of this from the very beginning. And but there's a sense in which you just every year you're just kind of doing what you're supposed to do. You don't really get a big picture of is anything really happening or what is the Lord's doing, and you just forget the little blessings. And so it was really a blessing just to sit back and say, okay, what has happened over the past 17 years? I just want to share with you some of the things that the Lord has enabled me to be a part of. And then we'll just work right into the message this morning. And I think there'll be a very natural connection to that. So I mentioned many of you know, we're in the Philippines. Actually, over the last years, we've been in about 15 different countries for some ministry-related purpose. The Lord has just granted us ministry in a lot of countries, of course, Philippines, Hong Kong, Malaysia, South Korea, Singapore, Bangladesh, UAE. I mentioned that in the video there. United Arab Emirates was in Myanmar. So I've been in about 15 different countries. One thing that's neat is we've been able to teach every year, all 17 of those years, we've been able to be a part in the Bible college there. I say that because usually when you furlough, you miss a year. And I was thinking about it. We've never furloughed in a way where we missed an entire year of our Bible college. We would be here in the States. We'd come back here for a little bit and then be back in time for at least the last half or the last quarter, or get back for the first half or whatever. We just always found a way to be there for a part of the school year. And even when we've been here during COVID and we got shut out of the Philippines, and I might have mentioned a little bit of that. Actually, the last time I spoke to you was by video. I don't know if you remember this. I was on a farm in Missouri, and I think I was walking around and showing you. And I just had so much fun with that sermon. It's more fun to preach when you're walking around and showing people things, And but anyway, I may have shared with you a little bit of that. But even during COVID, the last couple of years, we've still been able to minister, to teach in the Philippines because of Zoom. Basically, everything has been online since March of 2020, and things are now starting to shift, and we'll see what happens. But Asia has been much slower to reopen than we've been here in the States. And you may be aware of the fact that even in the last week or two, Shanghai, 25 million people, tried to lock down the whole city and trying to keep the cases at zero. And they are super tight. And there are other sides to it. People are locked in. They're not getting enough food. People are hungry. People are committing suicide because of the isolation. So this is the other side that you don't always hear about. But anyway, it's just been neat to be a part of the Bible college over these last 17 years, every single year in some way. I was trying to think about how many students have we had that I've taught in some way, some class, some lecture over the years. And I was trying to estimate maybe about 500 on-site students in one way or another have come through different classes or different lectures. We have about 100 plus that are enrolled in the Bible college. We have gone up as high as 130, 140 on-site. Then they did a change in the program, the way they did the schooling in the Philippines. Kind of a long story, but for 2 years, nobody graduated from high school. If you can imagine, just adding 2 years to high school. Anyway, but we're back up again in the realm of 100 or more, I think. COVID has in some ways helped us because people who would not be able to study in person, they can study anywhere in the world. And I may say more about that a little bit later. In addition to the students on site, we've had a part in training pastors who can't come to the city of Manila. We call it the CEP, or Continuing Education Program. And we've had 4 or 5 different locations, different parts of the Philippines. I'll fly there or travel there some way. The pastors come there. And then we gather in a church, and they'll sleep on the pews or on the floor. They usually give me a bed of some kind. And we just gather for a week, and we're there, have a great time. I'd estimate there's been 100 to 150 of those pastors that have been involved with in that program. That program was one actually this was a long-standing burden of mine, was to train pastors. So I was the one that set up this program, kind of overlaid kind of set up which classes would be offered. Have been involved in a lot of the teaching, and then the logistics, getting different professors, pastors, and so on down to these different locations and doing this teaching for these weeks. In addition to that, I've taught about 50 or so pastors or church workers from mainland China. We've had a program where we've brought mainland Chinese into our Bible college, not as a part of the program, but kind of using our facility. There's a couple of times where I went to a different island in that part of the world where they would bring pastors in, and then they would bring in professors, and we would meet in this location. Some really neat stories coming out of that. One of them, this doesn't involve me. This is kind of before I taught a couple of times, but there was the very first batch of pastors they were bringing out for this training program. A lot of these men had records, criminal records. They'd been in prison because of their work as a pastor coming out of mainland China. So you got a bunch of these men. I think they were coming out of Beijing, I think, and they're at the airport. A lot of these men, and they started thinking, how's this going to work? So we got criminal records. When we go through immigration, this is going to get flagged in the system, and they're going to shut us down. And so here they are in this huge airport, and they get to the immigration area, and by their testimony, the airport just shuts down. They lost electricity. So here they are, and so they just start shuttling people through, and these pastors, they just let them out through immigration into their gates, and they all made it to this training program. But just some of the things that God has done. One of the things was exciting. I got involved in. There was a missionary who had been working in Bangladesh, and we got in contact. He said, "Listen," he said, "I've got number of workers, church workers, pastors. These men have just almost no training. Is there something we could do?" So I put together an idea for a curriculum that we could use. Here are some basic classes. Here's what we could teach them. I can try to help in getting certain teachers over there. Let's see if we can make this work. And I went over there several times teaching, and then was there until we saw the first class graduate of those men. And I guess there were about probably 30 or more that had some influence in their, not all of them graduated, but some influence in their lives. Taught a class in Korea, South Korea. Was in Myanmar with one of our former students who came to us, studied. He was from Myanmar, loved what he got, went back to Myanmar, said, "Can you come over?" And I came over and taught for him and was a part of what he's doing over there. Let me just share a neat personal story related to Myanmar. Myanmar is the modern name for Burma. You probably everybody knows that. Burma was actually the field of the first American foreign missionary, Adoniram Judson. Judson is usually considered to be America's first foreign missionary. They actually still use the Bible that Adoniram Judson translated. And unbelievable toil by Adoniram Judson. But anyway, for a long time I had been burdened, or had a burden for Burma, as it was known before Myanmar, and just really wanted to have a part in doing something for that country. And what I remember is one morning I was in the college office, and I was praying, and what I would do sometimes is I would just try to pray for across all the different Asian countries, and I would, depending which direction, I'd start with Japan and just work all the way across the different Asian countries to Pakistan on the far west, and that's kind of what I think of as part of Asia. And I would just pray for these different countries. And I just remember this one morning, I think it was a Wednesday morning, because there wasn't classes taking place. And so I was there and I was praying. I just remember really kind of pouring out my heart in a greater way for Myanmar and just saying, "Lord, would you give us something to do for Burma?" And as I remember it, and I hope I'm remembering this as you think back, you think, I hope I'm not exaggerating this at all, but I walked out of the office, and in the hallway, and literally there's this young man there, and he was from Myanmar. This is in the Philippines. And he's in our office. And I said, "Can I help you?" And he said, "Yeah, I'd like to study in your Bible college." And I said, "Oh, okay, this is great, So, he signed up and he started taking he had a bachelor's, and he was taking some of the seminary level classes. And I thought, well, this is great, this is the Lord's answer to prayer. And his name was Boy, with an I in the end, Boy. And well, he was kind of hit and miss in the classes. And he wouldn't do his work, and sometimes he was there, and sometimes he wasn't. Finally, he just disappeared. I thought, well, so much for that answer to prayer, And so, years, I don't know, 3, 4 years, I don't know, maybe 5 go by. And one day, this man from Burma shows up again in our office, a different guy. Said, hey, can I meet you? Yeah, my name is David Leon, and so on. And I said, great. So, how did you, so why do you want to study here? And how did you hear about it? I said, well, he said, I have a friend. His name is Boyi. And he told me, he said, this is the place you got to study because they believe the way we do. And so anyway, David Leon turned out to be one of the finest students from Myanmar we have ever had. And he's the one that I went over with and taught with him. He is a tremendous evangelist. And before he came and studied, the Lord had used him to see a number of people saved. And he had just been an evangelist all over different parts of, I think mainly in the capital city area. But he would say to me, he said, but I failed. He said, I didn't do any discipleship. He just loved to preach the gospel. He just evangelized all these people that got saved, but then they went into different churches and who knows where. And he's like, I got to disciple people, And so he went back and he started a church and things have been challenging, of course, because of COVID. And then if you know anything about Burma or Myanmar, this whole police, this whole coup that they've shut down people in the country. There's a strong Buddhist push and so on. But just really neat the way the Lord has given a door of ministry in that country. And so if I put together these ones in different areas, and China, Bangladesh, and Myanmar, Korea, whatever, all these different places. So I would estimate that in some way or other, I've taught 800 to 1,000 students, church workers, pastors, over the last 17 years. I was trying to estimate, how many class hours have I lectured? How many hours have I taught? I'm not sure. I thought at least 3,000 class hours. Because of my training, my doctorate in the Old Testament, I've taught all the Old Testament classes at our college. The way we do it is we have books on every section of the Bible. So we'll do like Pentateuch, historical books, poetic books, the prophets, and then we go to the New Testament, Gospels, and so on. So we try to make sure that they've had classes from every part of the Bible. We offer Hebrew. I've taught all 3 of the Hebrew classes we offer. I've taught all 6 of the Greek classes we offer. I've taught some of the systematic theology, some of the Bible doctrines, some of the preaching classes, the Bible interpretation classes, words and works of Christ. I've taught parts of Christian family, Christian literature. I'm teaching that right now, Tuesday nights. Bible history and geography. I've taught missions, methods of Bible study, biblical theology, expository preaching. I just want to say something about this. This really is remarkable. The people that started our college, I know 30, I lose track, 1985, 37, whatever years ago, their goal was that these men and women training for ministry would have the finest possible biblical training possible for them. And so they put together this curriculum that covers everything. The Philippines, as you know, is a developing country. And you have 7,000 islands. They come, different languages, and so on. When the things we're giving them, for some of them, it's like they have to stand on their tiptoes to get it. We're just giving them so much. They just love it. But what is fascinating is, here we are in this country, very much a developing country. But here they have a chance to study Hebrew and Greek. Think about somebody who wants to train for ministry in the Philippines. They get to take Greek. They can take 4 semesters of undergraduate level Greek. Same thing you'd get at Maranatha or Baptist College of Ministry, at other Bible colleges. Then we offer 2 semesters of graduate level Greek. And I'm teaching a class right now called 2 Corinthians in Greek. By the time we're done, we will have read together Either they'll read it alone or I'll read it in class together. We'll have read every single verse in Greek in 2 Corinthians. So there's just tools they're getting. Hebrew. I don't know how many Bible colleges in the Philippines offer Hebrew, the language of the Old Testament. So we have this undergrad class which I teach called Hebrew Lexicon. Lexicon is like a dictionary. So basically this is for undergrad students, how to use a Hebrew dictionary. And this last time we used Blue Letter Bible .org, net, whatever it is, com. Anyway, and showed them how to use the Hebrew tools on this website. They just loved it. Now they can access this website when they see the Hebrew letters. They know the Hebrew letters. They know some of the basics of the Hebrew language. They can access these tools. They can do Hebrew word studies and so on. Then we have 2 semesters of graduate level Hebrew, where this is where it really gets serious. I'll be teaching this next year. But this is where it really gets serious. And they actually learn how to read Hebrew. And before they're done, we'll read the book of Ruth, and we'll read a few other passages in the Old Testament. So, this is just giving them the tools they need for ministry. That's just languages. And we have classes like ministering to adults, ministering to children, ministering to special needs. Like in the past, we've taken our students to a kind of a youth prison. And we'll go there, we'll hold a service, do some work there. Just a chance to, these are people with different needs. We have a class on church history so that they get an idea of how does Christianity in the Philippines, how does that connect with everything that's taken place from the time of the apostles, the time of Jesus? How does that all flow together? We offer classes on missions. How do you do missions? People in the Philippines, I have students, they want to be missionaries. They want to get out of their country and go to another country where they can minister. So how do they do that? What are the issues that they face? How to have a right philosophy of how to do missions? And God is using Filipinos in these countries. They are countries that I could never get into. I met this one guy, engineer, works in Saudi Arabia. And I met him at a church in the Philippines, and I said, so tell me about this. He says, I'm an engineer. That's how I can work in Saudi. He said, but I'm in Saudi, and I'm there to reach Saudis with the gospel. This is his burden. Not just Filipino Bible studies, because if you know anything about in that parts of the world, as you get these different Christian overseas workers, they have their own Bible studies with each other. But he's like, no, I'm not just doing that. I want to reach Saudis with the gospel. Can you imagine, one of us being able to go in there and reach Saudis with the gospel? This is what's happening. So we're just teaching these classes of Christian family. How to have what does the Bible say about a family? Now, some of us have grown up in Christian families. Some of us maybe haven't. Some of my students are first-generation Christians. We've got students who they're the only believer in their family. They've never seen how a family works. They have no idea how a mother and father should interact, how a father should treat his children, how a mother should... They don't have any idea how this works. So we have this class, Christian Family. We try to talk through some of that. Christian literature class. Who would have a class like this? We talk about classics in Christian literature over the centuries. Right now we're reading Pilgrim's Progress together, talking through applications and all of that. I'm just saying, here they go out. It's like one of the students I feel like I'm most invested in, who just been really, the Lord has really blessed him in his work and as in the ministry. And he said, I just took what I learned and I just put it to work. And so this is what God is doing over there. Moving on here, and in addition, I've been involved in numerous evangelistic efforts. We've passed out tracts, we've held Bible studies in a neighborhood park, participated in children's Bible clubs, preached at evangelistic concerts, evangelistic meetings, overseen cola wars in high schools and college. Have you ever heard like a cola war or cola clash? I don't know. It's like this idea of we'd bring a team over from the States, and we have this massive competition, usually Pepsi versus Coca-Cola. Those are just the teams. You're using a competition to get young people out. And the way we do it is I'm just the manager who coordinates the American team with a local pastor, And then we get permission to do this in like public high schools or public colleges. And we've had times where the college will say, okay, well, tell you what, we'll just give you one of our PE classes. And it's like 600 students. And we've walked in sometimes. I can visualize this one time. We walked on this huge covered court area. I mean, just massive court area. We walk in there. We've got this 4-foot big ball. They've never seen one of these big balls before. You walk into this huge big ball, and the place just goes crazy. There's probably 600, 800, maybe 1,000 young people in this, and you're almost out of control. I mean, you almost can't control this thing. And so they come down, you start the competitions, and you have games and all this, trivia. But you do all of this because you got a window then, and you get to preach the gospel. And we've preached the gospel to thousands of teenagers through using that Cola War ministry. The first Filipino I led to the Lord passed away. Several years ago now, he was killed. They were trying to shoot somebody else, and he got in the way. But as far as I know, he is the first Filipino convert I have in heaven. So many other things. Remember a Bible study? Used to have this Bible study in this park kind of near our house, and had this guy who was in the Mormon church for a long time, came out of that, got saved. And then then I met him several years later. We started this Bible study, and he had a burden for people that were in some of these other religious sects or cults, and so he would invite them. We'd have JWs. We'd had Muslims. Had come 2 or 3 times. These Muslims. There's a local cult there that believes that Jesus is only a man, and so we'd have them come to this Bible study, and so we'd try to witness to them and share the gospel. And I remember this one time, this man, just tragic, and he'd been there a couple times, as I remember. And he came. He was a Jehovah's Witness. He brought this beautiful Jehovah's Witness Bible. I mean, just beautifully bound, just big, and just And I remember just pleading with him. He wasn't feeling well. It was pretty obvious he wasn't feeling well. And I just pleaded with him that for some reason that day I just had this unusual opportunity. And I said, listen, you are putting all your faith in a system, in an organization. I said, what if that organization fails you? That is your only hope. And he would not be swayed. And I did not realize this. I probably should have put things together, but I left that Bible study, and I guess he was coughing up blood, and he died right there within minutes of our Bible study. And I just thought, oh wow, this is his final call. This is the last chance he had to hear the gospel. So these are just some of the different things that we've been able to do over the years. My family's a part of it. One of the things I wrote down as well, that's a part of our ministry, is we have 6 children, and I have all 6 have made professions of faith. 4 of them have been baptized, still working with my twins. I'm going through a discipleship book with them. Some of them are burdened for ministry, and I'm thankful for that, hoping the Lord will continue to work in their lives and lead them. So you're a part of this through what you've done for us over the years, and we are grateful for that. We're grateful for your prayers, your partnership. But I want to say this, that all those labors, and I feel like there's a lot of I when I talk through that list, like I've done this, or we've done this, or I've done this. But I want to say this, and this is what transitions us to our message, and that is that these are labors for the Lord's commendation. And this really is what 1 Corinthians 3, this is the passage that Pastor Weesner read earlier, and I'll try not to be too long here, honestly. But whatever has happened, these are labors for the Lord's commendation. In other words, it is up to the Lord to judge what was done for him. So up to the Lord to determine how much was labor. Sometimes you don't feel like you really worked that hard. But 1 Corinthians chapter 3, I'm just going to focus in really mainly on a couple verses and just draw out some implications. But Paul, in this context, the bigger context of 1 Corinthians 1-4, he's dealing with an issue of fleshly, carnal behavior among the Corinthians because they are creating factions because they like certain ministers better than others. And so they begin to form parties around their favorite preachers. We never do that, right, in our day here, right? Okay. They begin to form parties over their favorite preachers. And Paul has to say to them in verse 5, who's Paul? Who's Apollos? We're ministers. We're servants by whom you believed. All we are is servants. Even as the Lord gave to every man. And he says, I have planted, verse 6, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase. So then neither is he that planteth anything, neither he that watereth, but it's God that giveth the increase. And verses 8 and 9, these are the two verses I was working on this week. Now he that planteth and he that watereth are one. And every man shall receive his own reward according to his own labor. For we are laborers with God. Ye are God's husbandry. Ye are God's building. I just pull out some implications here. One of the things I see here in verse 8 is that Christ's servants are of equal importance, whether they are the sowers, the irrigators, or the reapers. He that plants and waters are one. You've got different tasks, you've got different abilities. They're all equally servants of Christ, equally working toward the same purpose. I've been struck by that verse at the end of Matthew 10, I think it's 41 and 42, where it says, those who, I'm going to mess it up, hang on. Matthew 10, 41 and 42. He that receives a prophet in the name of a prophet shall receive a prophet's reward. In other words, I receive a prophet. I show hospitality to a prophet and I get a prophet's reward out of this thing? Absolutely. There's this equality among the ministers of Christ. The servants, maybe is a word that we might, we can kind of affiliate with that. We're servants. We're together in this thing. You've got a different task from me. You've got different abilities than me. But we are one in this thing. We're equally his servants. John 4 says, so that the sower and the reaper can rejoice together. The second implication, though, out of this 1 Corinthians 3 passage is although those who plant and water are one, so we've got different tasks, different abilities, so on. We're one on this thing. We're together we're equally Christ's servants, but each will receive a reward according to his or her labor. And verse 8 actually uses this word, the same word twice. You can't really see it in our translation, but every man, each individual man shall receive each his own reward according to his own labor. There's this individual assessment. I mean, we're one, we're working in this thing together. If you receive a prophet, you get a prophet's reward. Okay, so there's this equality, but don't think it's just it's not just a group assessment. There's an individual accounting here that's taking place. 2 Corinthians 5 says, we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ. Each one of us. And the third idea I pull out of this is that any commendation that we receive will be according to one's labor. This is the word in verse 8, right? According to his own labor. And there's another word that is sometimes translated work or workers, but this word is a word that is sometimes translated in our Bible as toil. It's even translated at least once as weariness. This word labor is the idea of you are working to the point of weariness. And what this verse says is that each individual servant of Christ, each of them will each receive his own reward according to their labor. How much have you worked? Have you worked as a servant of Christ to the point of weariness? I would dare say many of you have. You know what it is to be weary after maybe a missions conference or after a vacation Bible school. And you get done and you're like, I don't think I can ever do that again. So I haven't been so tired in my entire life. I want you to think about this verse. You'll be rewarded according to your labor. The work that leads where it exhausts you to the point of weariness. And we tend to focus on visible success or measurable results. The New Testament repeatedly emphasizes labor. I've got this whole string of verses here. 1 Corinthians 15:58, know you not that your labor is not in vain in the Lord. Paul repeatedly talks about his labors. 2 Corinthians 6:5, 2 Corinthians 11:23 and 27. Verse 27 is where it's translated weariness. In weariness. 2 Corinthians 11:23 is where he says something like, in labors abundant, or maybe even says more abundant. Paul will say in 1 Corinthians 15, he'll say, by the grace of God, I labored more than anybody else. God knows the ministry is hard work, or should be, and he rewards his servants accordingly. And another implication that I draw from this passage is that each of Christ's servants can expect to receive a reward because they belong to God. I was really struck by the for. I know this probably just seems just a little bit ridiculous, but I was struck by the for at the beginning of verse 9. Because verse 8 says, okay, each will be received, every man shall receive his own reward according to his own labor. For. Well, what is the connection there? For we are laborers together with God. If you're looking at this in the original, really the first word of the verse is God's. God's, I'll put it this way, for God's co-laborers we are. And the emphasis is that they belong to God, and if they belong to God, then it only makes sense. If they're God's, and you keep reading in verse 9, and they're working on God's field, that's husbandry, so they're working on God's field, and they're working on God's building, so they're God's workers, and it's God's field, and it's God's building, well, it only makes sense that they're going to get a reward for their labors because they're God's. They're working for God. They belong to God. And whether their role was planting or watering, they can each expect to receive a reward for their labors because they each equally belong to God. They did not belong to the Corinthians. They belong to the Lord. I think of 1 Peter 5, where Peter talks about he's giving this admonition to the leaders of a church or churches. And it goes through how they should shepherd the flock that God has given them. And they should do so willingly. And they should do so as an example to the flock. And then he says that, I think it's verse 4. And when the chief shepherd shall appear, ye shall receive a crown of glory that fadeth not away. It's like, you're going to do all this work. You've got all these sheep you got to take care of. This is your flock. Don't look to them for your reward when the chief shepherd shall appear. Because you belong to him. Don't expect a reward from those sheep. You're God's. You're Christ's servant. And since all belongs to God, the laborers, the field, the building, the final assessment and commendation is up to God. Not to the Corinthians, who in their carnality may have sometimes cheered for their favorite preacher. All belongs to God, who assesses fairly based on the quantity of the work, labor, and its quality. Verse 13, of what sort it is. And I'm sure all of us get frustrated sometimes when we feel like we're treated unfairly, or something we did was overlooked or ignored, or the promotion went to the wrong person. We do not live in a fair world. I tell my kids, life is not fair, but God is always good. Life is not fair. But at that judgment seat, everyone will receive according to his or her labor, of what sort of work it is. It's going to be absolutely fair. I don't even like the word fair. It'll be right. And so it is God himself who is the one who is giving rewards to his servants. Now, sometimes there's this idea, well, is it okay to work for a reward? Or is that like self-serving? Is there too much self-interest in, okay, God's going to give a reward, and should I work for a reward? And I would just say this in short, that you've got repeated promises in the Bible that we'll be rewarded for our labors as Christ's servant. I've got verses from Matthew to Revelation in my notes. And God mentions those. Why would God dangle a carrot out there that we're forbidden to think about? It's like he wants us to think about it. One of the very last promises in the Bible is in Revelation 22:12, where Jesus says, I'm coming and I'm bringing my reward with me. Why does the Bible pan to a close with that statement? I'm coming, and guess what? I'm bringing my reward with me. I do think we need to keep in mind that, self-interest, somebody said this, self-interest is not the same as selfishness. Self-interest, in other words, doing things that are beneficial. Self-interest in the context of submission to God's will is not wrong. In fact, Ephesians will say something like, nobody hates himself or herself. That would be abnormal to do things that, if somebody does things that actually hurt themselves, we tend to lock them up. And the Bible encourages things like even exercise. People would flee persecution. Peter, when he gets out of prison, he doesn't hang around and go visit the people. He doesn't visit the people who are overseeing him. He takes off. Paul at one point gets in a basket and leaves Damascus. Timothy is instructed to do something to help his stomach. This is part of being in the image of God, using wisdom, common sense, creativity. Obviously, what's wrong is when self-interest comes into conflict with our doing God's will. But even mature believers recognize that doing the will of God is always in our best self-interest. It's amazing. What most glorifies God is also what is in your and my best interest. Ultimately, they flow together. But obviously, I'm just still in this idea of self-interest. Obviously, Christ's servants don't labor with a materialistic, calculating eye on what they will get. And I say this in part on Matthew 25, where Christ is speaking at the end of this chapter, and he talks about, he says, to the righteous, he says, come with me, inherit this kingdom that you've, and so on. And he says, because you visited me in prison, and you fed me when I was hungry, when I was naked, you clothed me, and you did all this stuff for me. And they say, when did we do that? And he says, well, when you did it to the least of these, you did it to me. And one of my takeaways from that is that they did this without any thought of receiving reward. They were just doing it because that was the right thing to do. That was a God-honoring thing to do. And then they're like, oh, I guess I did do it for you. There is no calculating eye on what am I going to get out of this. And I think as we think about this idea of reward, we need to keep in mind what about our reward will matter most. And I'm looking now at 1 Corinthians 4, this very next chapter. And Paul goes on and talks about, let a man, first verse, let a man so account of us as of the ministers or the servants of Christ. We're just a steward. We're just a servant. So we're just required to be found faithful. And verse 3, it is a very small thing that I should be judged of you or of man's judgment. Yea, I judge not mine own self. We dare not even commend ourselves. And I'm sure all of us in here who've walked with the Lord, you know what it is to look back on your own labors, and it is so full of self and so full of sin. He says in verse 4, For I know nothing by myself, yet am I not hereby justified, but he that judgeth me is the Lord. Therefore judge nothing before the time until the Lord come, when both will bring, who both will bring to light the hidden things of darkness, and will make manifest the counsels of the hearts. And here's the line I wanted. And then shall every man have praise of God. And ultimately, that's what those crowns are about. They are tokens of having received the coveted well done from our Lord and Savior. It really is not about the value of the rewards. It's not about the value of those crowns. I mean, what kind of value can you put on a crown where the streets are paved with gold and the gates are each one pearl? Nobody's talking about how much your crown is worth. And you think about even Olympic athletes, when they have this gold medal, they're not talking about how much that gold is worth. The value of that medal is what it stands for. That they have received the approbation of the community in which they've labored. And they've reached a level of achievement according to the ideals of that community or of that sport. That's what makes that thing valuable. It's like that football that somebody bought, Tom Brady's last football for $500,000, his last football. The next day he comes out of retirement. That football's not worth anything. But somebody paid $500,000 for it. Why? Because of what it stood for. Not because of the leather it's made out of. I'm just saying that, you think about ultimately what it's all about is that end of verse 5. Then shall every man have praise of God. That's to be commended by God. Which is a reminder that we work for Him, right? The Lord, verse 4, the Lord, He that judgeth me is the Lord. And that's both a fearful thing and an encouraging thing, right? He's going to sort it out. We work for Him. I don't work for GFA. I don't work for a Bible college. I don't work for our sending church. I don't work for our supporters. It's nice to receive commendations from those who partner with us on our labors. But verse 4, again, the Lord is our judge. And we hope that at least some of our labors will survive His proving fire and will reveal themselves to be gold, silver, and precious stones. I'll close with this. Several years ago, one of our twin boys, we were getting ready to go somewhere. He was 2 or 3 years of age, and I was wanting to make sure he was ready. I think we were going to church, wherever we were going. I wanted to make sure he was ready. And so we were both upstairs, and I said to him, I want you to go downstairs, and I want you to put your shoes on, and I want you to come back upstairs. I want you to show me that you obeyed me. So he's like, okay, yeah, yes, sir, Daddy. So I hear him, tromp down the stairs and goes down. He puts his shoes on, which even till today is a long time for him. Anyway, that's beside the point. So he goes down, and so I hear him coming up the stairs. Loud voice, Daddy, I put my shoes on. And as he's going up the stairs, he passes various siblings and other people, and I say, Daddy, I put my shoes on. And they're tired of hearing his voice, Daddy, I put my shoes on. They're like, yeah, okay, fine, yeah, you did well, Daddy, I put my shoes on. Next flight, here's the next person. Yeah, okay, good job. Okay, you can be quiet now. Daddy, I put my shoes on. I say, yeah, good job, But he's not happy until he gets up to where I am upstairs. And he stands before me, and he says, Daddy, I put my shoes on, and I'm required to look down at his feet and look him in the eye and say, good job, son, you obeyed. And he kind of lifts his shoulders. Life is great, and he walks off, and he is as happy because he just received commendation from the only person that mattered to him. It's great to get commendation, right? It's encouraging. But in a sense, we're all kind of like my little 2 or 3-year-old, right? I mean, we go through like, good job, good, yeah, good, yeah, thank you, good job, yeah, thank you, amen, thank you. But what we're really wanting is that day for him to say, good job, you did a good job. So 1 Corinthians 3:8, each will be rewarded according to his own labor. We need laborers for the harvest field. We need laborers here in our country. We need laborers abroad. Who's going to labor? Where will you go? May God lead us to where he wants us to labor. Let's pray together. Father, thank you for the privilege to work. Lord, I don't even know if I can use the word labor. But Lord, would you, by your grace, give us the will, the strength, the health, the desire to labor for you in a way that is pleasing to you. And Father, you know the great need there is for laborers. There is a need for labor right in this community. There is need all over this globe. And help us to be willing to labor to the point of exhaustion for our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. And we ask this in his name. Amen.